There is a moment on a piece of CCTV footage from Good Friday, 2022, that lasts less than 10 seconds. A woman walks toward a white van parked on a Lancashire street. The passenger door opens. She gets in. The door closes. The van drives away. 10 seconds. That's all it takes. And for anyone watching that footage at the time, for anyone who glanced at a monitor as it played, there was nothing in those 10 seconds worth pausing for. Nothing alarming. Nothing that registered. Just a woman. Getting into a van. Going somewhere. Her name was Katie Kenyon. She was 33 years old. She had children at home who were waiting for her to come back. She never came back. And what happened between that moment, the door closing, the van pulling away, and the weeks that followed is not just a story about a crime. It is a story about what happens when someone uses your trust as a weapon against you. Because Katie Kenyon didn't get into that van with a stranger. She got into it with someone she knew. The footage looked like nothing. It was the last confirmed sighting of Katie Kenyon alive. Before the investigation. Before the search. Before the courtroom. You need to understand who Katie Kenyon was. Not because it changes what happened. But because what happened only means something when you understand who it happened to. Katie grew up in Burnley. She was 33 in April 2022. She had children, and if you speak to anyone who knew her, that fact is where every sentence eventually arrives. She was a mother in the most complete sense of that word, not just biologically, but in the way she organized her entire existence around them. The plans she made, the life she was building, the future she was working toward. It all came back to her kids. She was also, by every account, someone who didn't pretend to be anything other than what she was. Direct. Warm. The kind of person who told you the hard thing when you needed to hear it, who showed up when it mattered, who didn't disappear when life got complicated. Her friends described someone with a rare combination, tough enough to tell the truth, and kind enough that the truth never felt like cruelty. She had been through difficulties, the kind that most adults in their 30s know well. She had built a life through them rather than around them. She was not naive. She was not reckless. She understood people. She read situations. She had the particular sharpness of someone who had needed to develop it. And none of that was enough. Because the threat that came for Katie on a Friday morning in April didn't come from a direction she could have anticipated. It came from inside her own social world. It came from someone her life had given her reason to trust. When Katie didn't come home, the people who loved her knew almost immediately. This is the thing about a woman with children, with roots, with people who rely on her being reachable. Silence is loud in a way it isn't for people living more isolated lives. The missed calls. The unanswered messages. The hour stretching into 2 hours and then into something that could no longer be explained or waited out. A missing person report was filed with Lancashire Constabulary. And investigators had their starting point. Because there was footage. Officers pulled the CCTV and sat with it. A woman walks toward a white van. The passenger door opens. She gets in. The door closes. The van pulls away. They watched it again. In that room, with that footage playing, investigators understood the shape of what they were dealing with. The last confirmed sighting of Katie Kenyon was 10 seconds of footage. A van. A direction of travel. And somewhere out there, a driver who knew what had happened after the camera stopped seeing her. Finding that driver became everything. Lancashire Constabulary activated quickly. Missing person cases are graded by risk, and the circumstances here placed this at the highest level immediately. A mother with children. Zero contact. A CCTV sighting as the last known location. This was not a wait-and-see situation. Officers began working the camera network, the painstaking, frame-by-frame process of tracking a vehicle across petrol stations, junction cameras, retail park feeds, residential doorbells. Every camera in the area. Every angle. Every timestamp. The van appeared on footage moving away from Burnley. It headed north and west, out of the town, away from the camera density, toward open countryside where coverage thinned and then, eventually, stopped. And then there was nothing. A final frame. The van on a road heading outward. And then no more footage. Between that last sighting and wherever Katie was right now, there was a gap in the record that investigators could not yet account for. Day 1 ended. Katie had not been found. The family sat and waited by phones that wouldn't stop ringing with the wrong kind of news. Helicopters lifted above the Lancashire countryside at first light. Below them, search and rescue teams were already moving. Dog units working through farmland. Officers on foot pushing through wet ground and dense scrubland, covering every stretch of terrain methodically, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. Public appeals went out. A white Ford Transit van. A woman seen getting into it on Good Friday morning. Had anyone seen either of them? Had anyone seen anything? Information started arriving through tip lines. Every call assessed. Every lead followed up. Day 2 ended. Still nothing. The fear that had been sitting in the background of this investigation from the very first hour was becoming impossible to keep in the background. Every hour that passed without finding Katie was another hour's wait added to a case that was already bearing more than investigators wanted to name out loud. Something had happened to her. What they didn't yet know was who had made it happen. That was about to change. Somewhere in the information being assembled, somewhere in the CCTV analysis, in the interviews being conducted across Burnley, in the data being cross-referenced, investigators had established something they needed urgently. They had identified the van. And the moment they ran that identification, this case shifted on its axis. Because the van belonged to someone in Katie's life. Not a stranger. Not a threat from outside her world. Someone she knew. Someone connected to her through her own social network, through people she trusted, through relationships built over time. Someone her life had made familiar. His name was Andrew Burfield. He was 41 years old. Detectives now knew two things. Katie had been seen getting into Burfield's van. And she hadn't come home. They went to find him. When investigators sat across from Andrew Burfield and started asking questions about Good Friday, about the van, about his movements, about Katie, he gave them an account. He told them a story about where he had been and what he had done. And then detectives started checking it. The first check didn't hold. His account placed him somewhere. The CCTV evidence said otherwise. They checked another part of his account. Another inconsistency. Then another. A man with nothing to hide does not produce an account that comes apart every time investigators hold it against verifiable evidence. An innocent person does not give a story that the facts systematically contradict, detail by detail, until there is nothing left of it that stands. Burfield's account was collapsing. And his van was about to make things significantly worse for him. The van was seized and taken to forensic scientists. Forensic examination is not a quick process. It is methodical, exhaustive, and guided by the understanding that crimes leave traces in places that people trying to conceal them never think to look. Behind fittings. Along seam lines. In the fibers of upholstery compressed by weight. In the microscopic joins between surfaces that look clean and are not. The scientists worked through that van for days. The first significant finding came back. Then another. Evidence recovered from inside the vehicle told investigators something specific and material about what had happened in it. Not suggested. Not implied. The physical reality of what had taken place in that space, preserved in spite of whatever had been done to remove it. But that was not the detail that broke Andrew Burfield's account completely. That came from somewhere else entirely. It came from the device he had been carrying in his pocket the whole time. At some point during the investigation, detectives opened Andrew Burfield's phone records. They were looking for answers about where he had been. What they found instead was a map. Every modern smartphone quietly generates a record of its owner's movements. Location data. Timestamped. Continuous. Automatic. The phone doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for you to decide whether you want the record kept. It just keeps it, whether the owner knows or not, whether they want it to or not. Burfield's phone had been with him on Good Friday, 2022. It had recorded everything. Detectives looked at what the data showed. His phone had been in the forest of Bowland. Not briefly. Not passing through. It had been there, at a specific location, for a specific period of time, at exactly the point in the day when his account said he had been somewhere else entirely. His phone had recorded his movements with the precision of a device that has no reason to lie. Now detectives looked at the CCTV trail they had already assembled, the van's route tracked, camera by camera, out of Burnley and into the Lancashire countryside, and they laid the phone data alongside it. Two independent sources. Different methods. No coordination between them. They told the same story. A story that was completely different from the one Andrew Burfield had told. The search had a new focus. Not just Katie. The forest of Bowland. The forest of Bowland stretches across a wide swathe of Lancashire countryside. Ancient woodland. Open moorland. Valley floors crossed by streams that run dark in autumn and fast after rain. It is designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty, a place people go to walk and breathe and be somewhere that the noise of ordinary life doesn't reach. It is also, in the context of this investigation, the place where Andrew Burfield's phone placed him on Good Friday morning while he told detectives he had been somewhere else. Search teams moved into the Bowland area. Officers pushed through wet woodland and uneven ground in conditions that made every meter difficult. The terrain was dense in places, the kind of landscape where a person could remain hidden from even a careful search for days, or weeks, or longer. Dog units worked through areas where the ground cover was too thick to see through. The search was systematic, focused, and relentless. And then, in a remote location, well away from any path or track, in the kind of place that requires either detailed local knowledge or deliberate prior reconnaissance to find, the search teams found Katie Kenyon. She had been left there. The search teams had been looking for a missing woman. What they found was a murder scene. The case changed its name at that moment. Andrew Burfield was arrested. He was charged with the murder of Katie Kenyon. Preston Crown Court. Autumn, 2022. The jury was shown the CCTV footage first. They watched what investigators had watched in those first hours, a woman walking toward a white van on a Lancashire street, the door opening, Katie getting in, the door closing, the van pulling away. 10 seconds of footage from a Friday morning that had looked, at the time, like nothing at all. Now the jury knew what those 10 seconds had concealed. They were taken through the forensic evidence from the van. The scientific findings were specific and material. The jury heard from the scientists who had recovered them, the methodical language of expert witnesses describing physical evidence that couldn't be argued away. They were shown the phone data, the location history, the timestamps, the route that Burfield's own phone had recorded on Good Friday, placing him in the forest of Bowland during a period his account of the day didn't mention. Investigators had found that data. They had matched it against the CCTV trail. 2 independent records. 1 destination. And then the prosecution placed Burfield's account, the story he had told police in the days after Katie disappeared, directly alongside what all of that evidence showed. The jury could see the gap. They could see where his account had said one thing and the evidence said another. Again. And again. And again. His story didn't just fail to hold up. It failed at every point where it could be tested. The prosecution then turned to the question that had been waiting underneath the entire case. Why? The motive wasn't a moment of rage. That's the detail that made this case particularly disturbing to everyone who followed it. It wasn't an argument that spiraled out of control. It wasn't an impulse that overrode reason for a few terrible seconds. It wasn't the kind of violence that, however inexcusable, carries within it the recognizable shape of human emotion breaking apart at a seam. This was colder than that. At the root of the case was a financial grievance. Money, specifically, resentment about money. But not the kind of resentment that burns hot and fast and consumes itself. The kind that sits quietly. That calculates. That grows in the dark without making a sound. Burfield had a grievance. And rather than confronting it through any of the ordinary avenues available to a person in a dispute, he had let it become something else. He had let it harden into a plan. The prosecution argued, and the evidence supported, that Burfield had decided, before Good Friday morning, what he was going to do. He had arranged to take Katie somewhere. He had chosen a route. He had identified a location. And then, while the plan was in place, while the date was set, while everything was arranged, he had continued to be, to everyone around him, an ordinary person. A familiar face in a familiar social world. The kind of man who could offer a woman he knew a lift somewhere without raising any concern. He had carried all of that, the plan, the calculation, the decision already made, and he had presented a completely ordinary surface to the people around him. And then he had done what he had planned to do. And then he had driven back toward Burnley, and answered his phone, and sat across from police detectives, and given them a carefully constructed false account while Katie's family fell apart waiting for news that wasn't coming. That is not rage. That is calculation. That is a particular kind of coldness that very few people are capable of sustaining. The ability to plan harm in advance, to carry it out, and to return to ordinary life as though the world has not completely changed. Because for him, in those first days, he may have believed it hadn't. He may have believed that what he had done would stay hidden, that the forest of Bowland would keep what he had left there, that his account would hold. He was wrong. The jury deliberated. They had the CCTV. They had the forensics. They had the phone data. They had the account that didn't hold. They had everything that had been assembled over weeks of investigation, laid out in a courtroom with the precision of people who had worked through every detail until nothing was uncertain. The verdict: guilty. Andrew Burfield was convicted of the murder of Katie Kenyon. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. A minimum term of 26 years before the question of release can even be raised. 26 years is not freedom at the end of it. It is a threshold. And every consideration of what lies beyond that threshold will be shaped by what was established in Preston Crown Court: the premeditation, the concealment, the cold calculation of a man who planned a murder and then lied to investigators while a family waited by their phones in the worst hours of their lives. Katie's family spoke after the verdict. They didn't speak about the evidence. They didn't speak about the trial. They spoke about her. About who she was. About what she would never be there for. The shape of an absence that has a name and a face and a voice they won't hear again. Her children. The ordinary mornings. The days that will never stop being wrong because she isn't in them. There are no words adequate to that. There is only the fact of it. There is a question at the center of this case that deserves a direct answer. Why did she get into the van? She got into the van because Andrew Burfield was not a stranger. He moved in her social world. He was connected to people she trusted. He occupied that particular category of human relationship where scrutiny feels unnecessary, where the logic of the connection itself is the reassurance. He wasn't someone she had just met. He was someone the structure of her life had made familiar enough that getting into his van on a Friday morning didn't require a second thought. And that familiarity was the most dangerous thing about him. He didn't need to deceive her through elaborate means. He simply needed to present a normal surface to someone who had no reason to look behind it. The threat he carried was entirely invisible, not because Katie missed something that was readable, but because he had made certain there was nothing visible to read. He had thought about that. He had calculated it. He had relied on her trust as a mechanism for getting her into that vehicle. And it had worked exactly as he had intended it to. That is the part of this story that does not leave you. Because it means there was no moment she could have caught. No signal she failed to read. No decision she made carelessly. She trusted someone her social world had given her reason to trust. He used it to kill her. What the weeks that followed demonstrated is worth holding on to, because it matters beyond this specific case. The CCTV network told the truth when Burfield would not. His phone recorded everywhere he went on Good Friday, silently, automatically, without his understanding of how completely that record would later be read. The forensic examination found what he believed was gone. 3 independent sources. 3 different methods. All 3 told the same story. His lies had nowhere left to go. On CCTV, Katie Kenyon disappears in less than 10 seconds. A van door opens. She climbs inside. The door closes. And the rest of her life disappears with it. That footage still exists. It is still watchable. Less than 10 seconds of unremarkable video from an unremarkable Lancashire street on a Friday morning in April. In a courtroom in Preston, a jury watched it with the knowledge of everything that came after. They watched it knowing about the forensic evidence from inside the van. About the phone data placing Burfield in the forest of Bowland. About the remote location where search teams had found Katie. About the account that hadn't held. About the plan he had made before she ever walked toward that passenger door. And those 10 seconds looked very different by then. They looked like trust. The trust of a woman who had been given every reasonable basis to extend it. Used as a weapon by a man who had spent time making sure she would. That is what Andrew Burfield did with the fact that Katie knew him. With the fact that her social world had made him familiar enough that she got into his van without asking questions. He took that trust and he built a murder around it. She deserved to come home that day. She deserved the life she was building. She deserved every ordinary morning she will never wake up for. Her name was Katie Kenyon. She was 33 years old. And she should never be forgotten.